You hear the term green economy thrown around all the time, right? But how do we actually know if we're making any progress? I mean, how do we measure the money and the effort we're all putting into protecting our environment? Well, today, we're going to explore the official accounting framework that answers exactly that.
It's a massive question. To manage everything from pollution to our natural resources, we first have to measure our effort. You've got to follow the money. And that's precisely what environmental economic accounting is designed to do.
So here's our game plan for this explainer. We'll kick things off with the official rulebook for all this measurement. Then we'll get really specific about what actually counts as an environmental activity. From there, we'll look at the two main ways of thinking about the green economy, dig into some key classifications, and finally, we'll tie it all together to see why this data is just so critical for making smart policy decisions.
All right, so where do we even begin? Well, the whole journey starts with an international standard that makes sure everyone is on the same page, speaking the same language.
This is the SEEA, which stands for the System of Environmental Economic Accounting. Now, the easiest way to think of it is like this. You know how GDP gives us a standard way to measure the economy? Well, the SEEA is kind of like the environmental version of that. It's the official UN-adopted rulebook that lets countries all over the world measure the link between their economy and the environment in a totally consistent way.
What makes the SEA framework so powerful is that it tracks three really key things. First, the natural resources we're using, like water and timber. Second, the emissions and the waste we're generating. And third, and this is the most important part for our conversation today, the economic activity that's specifically aimed at dealing with all those environmental issues.
Okay, but to measure any of this accurately, you first have to be crystal clear on your definitions. So what exactly counts as an environmental activity according to the SEEA?
It really boils down to two main buckets. On one side, you have environmental protection. This is all about tackling the bad stuff, the pollution. Think of a wastewater treatment plant. Then, on the other side, you have resource management. This is about being smarter with our inputs, like using renewable energy to be more efficient.
And here is the single most important rule to remember: primary purpose. For an activity to get counted, its main goal has to be environmental. So for example, if a factory installs some new equipment mainly to cut costs, it doesn't get included, even if that new gear happens to be more energy efficient. This strict boundary is absolutely essential for keeping the data clean and comparable.
All right, now we get to the real heart of it, the two main frameworks that are used to actually account for all this activity.
And honestly, this is a fantastic way to think about it. You can look at the green economy from two different angles. The demand side, that's who's paying for environmental solutions, and the supply side, that's who's producing all the goods and services that provide those solutions.
So first step, let's look at EPEA, the Environmental Protection Expenditure Accounts. This is all about demand. It tracks every single dollar spent by companies, governments, and even us as households, specifically on environmental protection. This is the who pays side of our coin.
Then on the flip side, you've got the EGSS, or the Environmental Goods and Services sector. This is the supply view. It measures the economic output of all the environmental products being made, everything from solar panels to recycling services. This is the who produces side.
This table here lays out the key differences perfectly. Look at the coverage. EPA only looks at protection, while EGSS covers both protection and resource management. The perspective, of course, is spending versus producing. But really zoom in on that last row, on adapted goods. This is a huge technical difference. EPA only counts the extra cost, while EGSS counts the full value of the product. Let's dig into what that actually means.
So let's get into those nitty-gritty details. How are all these different green products and technologies actually classified?
Okay, this is a really important distinction to get. End-of-pipe solutions are basically add-ons that clean up pollution after it's been made, like a catalytic converter on your car. But integrated technologies are all about prevention. They're about changing the process itself to stop pollution from ever being created in the first place. Two very different approaches.
Now let's tackle that trickier category we mentioned, adapted goods. These are just everyday products that have been tweaked to be more environmentally friendly than the standard version. Think of things like mercury-free batteries or a hybrid car.
So remember how we said the EPEA only counts the extra cost of these adapted goods? Here's how that actually works. Let's say some eco-friendly fuel costs 10 cents more per gallon than regular fuel. Well, the EPEA only records that extra 10 cents as an environmental expenditure. It isolates the specific premium that the consumer is paying just for that environmental benefit.
Whew, we've gone through a lot of technical stuff. So let's zoom back out and answer the most important question of all. Why does any of this matter?
This is why it's a game changer. This kind of data allows governments to create policies based on actual evidence, not just guesses. It helps businesses spot new opportunities. It lets us track the real growth of the green economy, figure out the actual costs of regulations, and analyze the potential for green jobs. Basically, it moves the whole conversation from just opinion to hard facts.
You know, this quote from the official SEEA guide really says it all. Without standardized, reliable data, all our debates about the economy and the environment are basically happening in the dark. These accounting frameworks, well, they turn on the lights. And that brings us to one final, really critical thought. In a world that is so driven by data, if we can't properly account for how we're responding to environmental challenges, can we truly say we're responding at all? These frameworks give us the tools to make sure our actions aren't just well-intentioned, but that they're effective, measurable, and ultimately accountable. Thanks so much for joining this explainer.